welcome to the program once again. Thank you very much for your time. And Etse Sikanku, whom you know, today he's here on another mission, not about the Trump. And now, Jennifer, just before I introduce you, Etse and I have had this program here with Sarah and others, and we're talking about the American election. And he famously thought Trump will not get a nomination. He got it. I don't know what he thinks now, having been to America, and both of you perhaps will have a better answer about what's happening in America. But viewers, Jenny Hasty, who is on my immediate left, is a U.S. Fulbright specialist and professor of anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania, United States. She's a cultural anthropologist specialized in media, politics, and corruption in West Africa, specifically in Ghana. Isn't that nice? Her book, The Press and Political Culture in Ghana, explores styles of journalism at state and private newspapers in the context of democratization in the late 1990s. She has published articles on media, popular culture, politics, and diaspora issues in cultural anthropology, public culture, ethnography, Africa Today, and Ghana studies. She's currently working on projects involving anti-corruption, citizens journalism, and new media technology. She is in Ghana under the auspices of the U.S. Fulbright Specialist Program and at the invitation of the African Center of International Law and Accountability, ASLA, which is led by our friend William Nyako, and also a think tank. ASLA is a think tank incorporated under both U.S. and Ghana law. So that's Jennifer. This is her book, The Press and Political Culture in Ghana. This is a copy that she's graciously offered to me. Thank you very much for coming, Jennifer. And Dr. Sikanku is here. At the tail end of the program, we will look at that wonderful book that Etse has put up. It's entitled The Afrocentric Obama and Lessons on Political Campaigning, how relevant it is at this time, 2 months to a general election in Ghana. So, Jennifer, when you did your research, what are the specific challenges that you found that Ghanaian journalists face?
Well, I found, first I went to work for The Independent, and at that time, the private press was just coming back into being.
You worked for the Independent newspaper?
Yes, I did.
Okay. That's Cabral Blami's.
That's correct, that's correct. So I met Cabral, he invited me to come work for his newspaper, and I came on as a political reporter, and I worked there for about 3 months. And I found that there was a great deal of passion for journalism. There was a great deal of desire to be watchdogs in the public interest, to really hold government accountable. The front pages were ablaze with corruption allegations, and the political struggle was just, everyone was caught up in it, and it was really a thrilling time. However, it was very difficult doing journalism in those times. Cell phones were not something that journalists had in those days. We had a car. We didn't always have access to it, so oftentimes we would have to take a taxi or even trotro to get to our assignments. When we got to assignments, since we were considered an oppositional paper, it was very difficult to get sources to talk to us, so we were faced with obstacles all around. Our resource base was difficult. It made life difficult. After about 3 months working for The Independent, though, I crossed over and worked for Daily Graphic when Adom-Otchere was in charge there. Yeah. And I found a very, very different scene, a very different kind of journalism practice there. So the challenges faced by journalists at Daily Graphic were almost the opposite of what was happening with the private press. Journalists with Daily Graphic would be invited to state functions every day. You had transport provided for you. You'd be invited in, and you'd be given the speeches that were to be delivered at the event. There'd be some commissioning of some development project. You would even sometimes have a nice item 13 with some drinks and some refreshment. And then sometimes your transport was even provided for you back to the office. And then you had your nice speech, so it was very easy to go and type in your story. Your life was just, the state really reached out and helped journalists at Graphic in those days. And I think it resulted in a very positive portrayal of Rawlings in those days. That has significantly changed. Significantly changed.
But our younger viewers who are looking at us will not be able to
identify with that. Yeah, that's right.
They won't be able to identify with that at all.
Yeah, that's how it was in those days.
What observations have you made about the changes?
About the changes. Well, I've seen a real shakeup in the media landscape, and so it's not particularly for Daily Graphic. You don't see that kind of partisan journalism that you saw before. I mean, you see a very responsible form of journalism. And
from the Graphic?
Well, I think I would say yes. Looking at it for the time I've been here in the country, and following it from time to time while I've been in the U.S., it is. I think Daily Graphic takes itself very seriously as a really central newspaper, a newspaper that has a really strong history, long history, and so yeah, I think you have this sense of public interest journalism and kind of trying to avoid being caught up in overtly partisan stories.
I'll ask you the question about how electronic media has changed the landscape. I don't know whether you've done some research in that area.
Yes, yes.
But let Etse come in on that whilst you think about that. Etse got into the media arrived at the point where electronic media was the king, no longer print anymore. Print largely relies on electronic media.
Yes.
A new phenomenon of newspaper reviews have hit the electronic media space, and so that's how prints get noticed.
Yes.
But somehow people don't buy the prints because they have been fed with the stories already.
Yeah.
Etse, how do you relate as a much younger journalist? How do you relate to what she's saying and your own experience having worked with electronic media?
Yes, and I might say that I actually used that book in my doctoral dissertation research. I found it in the library and it was very helpful. So it's a great book. Thank you very much for the scholarship.
Thank you.
So the media landscape now is defined by the digital media era. I do agree with that, compared to in previous eras where there was a clear distinction between the state media and the private media, and that affected the kind of journalism that was done. Now there's a plethora of media houses, over 200 radio stations in the country, an uncountable number of online news sources in the country, and radio, TV stations have multiplied. Now, the thing that you find, though, is that although there is a multiplicity and a diversity of the radio stations or the media houses, there hasn't been too much in terms of the content, not a lot of diversity in terms of the content. So I did some research called Intermedia Agenda Setting, trying to look at who sets the media agenda in Ghana. And you realize that a lot of times the online media houses are still taking off their feed from the main newspapers. And so yes, there's a lot of it, but then there is a lot of similarity and convergence in terms of the content. And so you go to one media house, publishes a paper, and then keeps repeating itself in different papers. And the mistakes that are committed by that media house are seen in the others. And so I would say that yes.
So is it the print that's leading or is it electronic radio?
It was the print and the radio stations. But the online news websites tended to take their feed off from the print and the radio stations, and so even the GNA, which is the wire service, used to also lead, but I think that is different now.
But is the electronic media not leading the news in terms of generating news by far, way ahead of the print at this time?
I think it's still the radio stations.
The radio stations are leading. That's what I mean. The electronic radio.
Electronic radio.
Yeah, it's leading by far.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant online. It's following, but yes, the electronic radio.
Comparing electronic to print.
I do still think that the radio now sets the agenda.
Absolutely.
More than the print. And even to some extent,
does print set agenda at all these days? Because by the time print puts out a story, radio already knows. And whenever radio gets a story, it will go with that story. I think there was a contest in the early 90s about the time that you may have been leaving, whether this was the good thing to do. And the Chronicle, for instance, had fought the newspaper review for a long time because the Chronicle in those days will always have original stories because of the depth of its investigations. But over time, it appears that the electronic media has taken a clean lead in terms of the story because of its basic technological function that it can put out the news at any time. And because a lot of Ghanaians are hooked onto it, because you buy it just once and you don't have to buy it every morning like the newspaper. Politicians and newsmakers also like to feed the electronic media with the story. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think the danger in switching over to the electronic media in this way is that you shorten the news cycle, because electronic media throughout the day, every hour, every 2 hours, they have to come out with something new to say. And when that happens, as really has happened in the U.S. with CNN and that kind of coverage, journalists start covering very, very minor things that people have said. They start following little tiny blips in polls and speculating about why.
You mean the soundbite?
Well, sound bites, but also making a whole lot out of nothing. And then updating it, and then really focusing on a narrative and batting it back and forth throughout the day, and really focusing on what people have said. And sensationalism, it really plays into really the forces that made Donald Trump who he is in our landscape, is this kind of 24/7 news cycle. So switching over to electronic media, I think is it's very fascinating.
You're saying that Trump says something that is either not verifiable, or any politician says something that is either not verifiable or that is not that significant. Electronic media, because they have to broadcast news every hour,
yes,
they'll pick it up.
They'll pick it up, and then someone will respond to it, and then that's their next story. And then they can play that and play that and play that. It's a narrative they play out, and by the time they've played it out, then they've hopped onto something somebody else has said. But this kind of speech act journalism goes very well with electronic media.
But why is it not great?
Why is it not great?
Yeah.
Oh, well, because...
You said it shortens the news cycle, but if it does, I mean, no one loses if the news cycle is shortened.
Well, here's the problem, because many media scholars feel that that journalists should be playing a bigger role in political campaigns by looking at the issues, by examining policy, by promoting analysis, by promoting complex social thought, and not just following this volley back and forth of he said this and she responded this way and someone else commented about the whole exchange. So it really, I think, undercuts the whole role of the media in elections. And I think, you know, American viewers are really tired of it. It makes people cynical, so that they learn less and less about political candidates. The more the political candidates are talking, and they're learning less and less about them, because we're not really learning about those complex issues. Complex issues don't play very well in that kind of cycle, because they don't change very much over the course of the day. You know, your platform on climate change, it is what it is. It's not going to, at least it shouldn't change. When it does change, then people start asking questions. So I think that's the danger of moving into electronic media.
But what's happening with print media, for instance, in America? Have they also lost the battle to electronic media the way we are talking about in Ghana?
Well, I wouldn't say that they've lost the battle, but I think those that have succeeded are those that are deeply entrenched and those that have found a way to make money through electronic, you know, so they put up the paywall, and so you have to, you can get,
you pay to read them on online, that's what you mean?
That's
right.
The
Washington Post, New York Times,
yes, that's right, that's right. And so I think, I mean, those newspapers are never going away. But the smaller newspapers in smaller towns, you know, more and more of their content is coming from outside. And so they're no longer able to hire investigative journalists. They're no longer able to support local staff. So you may still have a print newspaper in a smaller town, but it's just reflecting news from elsewhere.
You did a bit of study about Ghana. How does Ghanaian history and culture influence journalism?
Well, I would say in two ways. I think that Ghanaian history in particular is a very, very powerful legacy for Ghanaian journalists. So Ghanaian journalists, they have a very proud history of really leading the struggle for independence, and it really created this kind of animated voice.
Let me not interrupt you, but there's a very important issue that you have raised about Ghanaian journalists leading the independence struggle. Now, who were these journalists? These were politicians. Dr. Nkrumah, for instance, was the editor of the Evening News.
That's correct.
Now, there's a creeping conversation that I'd like you to comment on about what we call in Ghana political journalists. So politicians who are also journalists. So Kweku Baku is a politician. He runs a newspaper. There are politicians who own radio stations. But you have started this narrative about the proud history that we should be of political journalists, because most of them in those days, Nkrumah was the leading candidate for elections, and he ran a newspaper. So keep that in mind. I'll come to ask you that critical question that we're being blamed for these days about by creating what they call the phenomenon of political journalism.
Absolutely. So we get to the second point that I was moving towards. What happened with Nkrumah once he got into power? He came into power on the back of his newspaper. It really, really helped him. Self-government now. And then once he got in power, what did he do? He harassed most of the other newspapers out of existence, except Ashanti Pioneer, and clamped down on the media and controlled the media. He knew the power of the media. And he had, his own ideology for doing so. The idea of, creating national unity and cohesion and
a single opinion.
That's what it wound up being towards the end of the day. And so, although it is a proud history, as you point out, although it's a proud history that leading the struggle for independence, it also has the danger of then turning and becoming a kind of authoritarian control. The politician journalists may want to get rid of those alternative voices once in power.
Okay, you were telling us about how the history and culture influences.
Yes.
Yeah, so finish with that.
I think...
so the history is what you've told us.
Yes.
The culture is what?
Well, I think one thing that I saw, and I still see a little bit in the newspapers, is a lot of stories about donation and gift giving and exchange. That seems very prominent. It's not something that you see in American newspapers as much. So when
I don't understand that. Like donation.
So I mean, you'll see like in Daily
to
Graphic.
the Kolibu Teaching Hospital.
That's correct.
Yeah,
You'll see someone showing up.
As news stories.
Yeah,
yes,
that's correct.
So you'll see someone showing up, and I'm not saying that that's not a news story, because I think it is a news story. I mean, I think in every society, in every culture, you have different qualifications for news
values.
Yeah, different news values, and I think that's important and it's good. But I think that there is something, something cultural about it that makes it interesting and relevant in some places and not so much in others.
I see. What are you seeing about Ghanaian media going forward over the next 10 years? What's your prediction of how it's going to turn out? With digital migration, with all of digitization, online media, social media?
Yeah, well, I would say I would definitely see a move to digital and a move to people getting almost all of their news through their small devices, small portable devices that they carry around. And I think that probably will mean more and more ubiquity of news and more circulation.
How will that affect the finance and the wealth creation through news media?
Wealth creation, well, I think just as in the U.S., new models will have to be created for making it a viable business. And I don't know what that would look like.
Actually, let's talk about your book. So what happened in America? Of course, you met Jennifer.
I did.
What happened?
I did. She was gracious enough to have me in her class as a guest speaker. She ceded the whole class time to me. Thank you very much. Yeah, and her class was a very intelligent, exciting class, University of Pennsylvania, very prestigious.
Was it a mass communication class?
It was an African studies class.
Okay.
Yes. It was an African studies. But that was just one of our book readings that we had. We had one at Harvard University as well, hosted by the Harvard African Law students. We had one at the Iowa State University. It was actually two different classes, a political communication class and international communication class combined. And then we had the book reading. And the book itself was launched at the University of Iowa.
Is that the book reading that we're seeing? Who's in the library over
That's
there?
actually the head of department, Iowa State University.
Your university?
Yes, journalism program, Professor Bujeya. He's the head of department. We donated a copy to the library and a copy to him as well. So this is what Jennifer did. So this was the UPenn reading in Jennifer's class.
So when you went reading, do you read the whole book?
Not the whole book. It's actually more of a public discussion, and we get feedback as well. But I talk about what the book is about first. I highlight certain key essential chapters in the book. I try to read from some of these chapters, and then we get a discussion going on. We get some questions, and really interesting questions. People were intrigued and excited about it. I must say, though, that Jennifer's class presented to me some of the most challenging questions. Those students, where they read the book and they came to class very, very prepared. So it was a very insightful and very fruitful trip. And we're happy to be back here in Ghana to do the launch on Saturday.
Okay, great. That's Saturday. What time is it?
Saturday at the British Council Hall at 5 p.m. And it's
so this is my copy, yeah?
It is your copy.
I'd like you to autograph it for me, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'll be honored to do that. You're my senior audience. So right now,
Jennifer already has a copy, do you?
Yes,
Yeah, you do.
I do.
Okay, because you hosted the book. So what do you think about the book, though, Jennifer?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
And a fascinating topic and very, very timely.
Yeah.
The relationship of Obama to Africa and the role of Afrocentrism in American politics. It's very timely and interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheers, my pen.
Oh, sorry about that.
And Jennifer, would you do me? Oh, you've already
I've
done that.
already done it.
For Paul, with admiration. Thank you. HS, what time is it on Saturday?
Saturday it's at 5 p.m. at the British Council Hall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where'd you go from here, Jennifer? Are you going back to the United States? What's happening? What's happening to the program? Did you enjoy teaching the students at the Ghana Institute of Journalism?
I was at Ghana Institute of Journalism this morning. I'll be on the radio.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Etse tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. American elections. I'll listen to that on Class FM.
Yes,
I'll be tuned in.
Yeah. And I have a whirlwind schedule coming up next week. I'm at Ghana Institute of Journalism several times next week.
Okay, Jennifer, I'll see you again next week. I'm sure we can have lunch one of those days and then talk a bit more. Etse, thank you very much. Congrats. And I don't know who you think will win, but I'll listen to you tomorrow on Class FM. What time is it?
It's at 9 a.m.
9 a.m. on the American election.
Yes.
Okay, super. So that's it for Good Evening Ghana. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow night we'll be at the Odadia event, and on Saturday we'll be at HS Book Launch at the British Council Hall. Have a good weekend. We meet again on Tuesday. Campaign peacefully.